Abraham Lincoln's life was a profound journey from the depths of hardship to the pinnacle of national leadership, defined by an unwavering moral compass and a quiet resilience forged in the fires of personal and national tragedy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. Born on February 12, 1809, in a crude one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, Lincoln's early life was one of stark poverty and survival. His world was one of cold winters, dirt floors, and relentless labor. His father, Thomas, was a stern carpenter and farmer, while his mother, Nancy, offered a wellspring of tenderness and spiritual guidance, teaching young Abraham to read and nurturing his innate curiosity. This fragile stability was shattered when Lincoln was just 9 years old. His mother succumbed to milk sickness, a deadly illness caused by contaminated milk, leaving a wound in Lincoln's heart that never fully healed. He helped carve her coffin and bury her beneath a handmade wooden cross, an experience that instilled in him a deep, lifelong sorrow and a profound empathy for suffering. The following year, Thomas remarried Sarah Bush Johnston, a kind woman who brought books into their Indiana home. She treated Abraham as her own, helping to mend his broken spirit. Despite this new kindness, the loss of his mother had changed him. The boy grew tall and lanky, often described as awkward and ungainly, but he possessed a mind that hungered for knowledge. With few formal schools, he became an avid autodidact, walking miles to borrow books like Life of George Washington and studying them by firelight. He worked tirelessly splitting rails, planting crops, digging wells, but even during manual labor, his thoughts were elsewhere, carving quotes into fence posts or rehearsing speeches in his head. By his early 20s, after trying various trades including store clerk and flatboatman, he settled in New Salem, Illinois. There, people began to notice not his appearance, but his sharp intellect, his gift for storytelling, and his ability to win debates with clarity and calm, marking the beginning of his emergence onto a larger stage. His path led him to law and politics in Springfield, Illinois, where he met Mary Todd, a woman of sharp intelligence and political ambition from a wealthy Kentucky family. Their courtship was tumultuous. Lincoln, plagued by what he called the hyper, likely clinical depression, broke off their engagement at one point, fearing he was unworthy of happiness. They eventually married in 1842, forming a complex and often stormy union. They faced immense personal grief, losing 3 of their 4 sons in childhood, a loss that deepened Lincoln's melancholy, but also solidified a bond of loyalty between him and Mary, who fiercely believed in his destiny. Lincoln's rise in politics culminated in his election as the 16th President of the United States in November 1860. His victory, however, was not celebrated in the South, where it was seen as a direct threat to the institution of slavery. Before he even took office, 7 states had seceded, forming the Confederate States of America. When Lincoln arrived in Washington, D.C., in March 1861, under heavy disguise due to assassination threats, the nation was already on the brink of war. The spark came in April when Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun. Lincoln's primary goal was clear: to preserve the Union. Yet, he faced a monumental task. He had no military experience, his generals were often ineffective, and early battles brought devastating losses. He bore the weight of the nation on his shoulders, barely sleeping, visiting wounded soldiers, and writing deeply personal letters to grieving parents. As the war dragged on, Lincoln grappled with its purpose. While initially focused on unity, he came to see that the war could not be won without confronting the monstrous injustice of slavery. After the pivotal Union victory at Antietam in September 1862, he made his decision. On January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate-held territories forever free. This transformed the war from a fight for preservation into a crusade for human freedom, inviting thousands of formerly enslaved men to join the Union Army and fundamentally altering the soul of the nation. By 1863, the toll of the war was etched deeply into Lincoln's face. Photographs show a man aged beyond his years, his eyes heavy with the burden of countless telegrams reporting the dead. The death of his beloved son, Willie, in the White House in 1862 had been a private agony, but he carried on with a quiet resolve. In November of that year, he traveled to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to dedicate a cemetery for fallen soldiers. In just 272 words, His Gettysburg Address became one of the most powerful speeches in American history, reminding the nation of its founding principles and its need for a new birth of freedom. In April 1865, after 4 long, bloody years, the war finally ended. General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. For the first time in years, Lincoln felt a great weight lift. On the evening of April 14th, seeking respite, he and Mary attended a play, Our American Cousin, at Ford's Theatre. At 10:15 p.m., as laughter filled the theatre, John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and ardent Confederate sympathizer who saw Lincoln as a tyrant, slipped into the presidential box. He fired a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head. Chaos erupted. Booth leapt to the stage and fled into the night. Lincoln was carried across the street to a boarding house, where doctors could do nothing. He never regained consciousness. At 7:22 the next morning, Abraham Lincoln took his last breath. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton stood at the foot of the bed and whispered, "Now he belongs to the ages." The man who had held a fractured nation together through its darkest hour was gone, his life ending in the very moment peace was achieved, leaving behind a legacy as a symbol of unity, compassion, and the enduring struggle for a more perfect union. The American Revolution was not a sudden uprising born of a single battle or decree, but a profound transformation that began as a quiet feeling of discontent and grew into a thunderous demand for a new kind of nation. It was a revolution fought not only with muskets on blood-soaked fields, but first and foremost, with words in pamphlets, speeches, and letters that reshaped the very idea of government and freedom. In the mid-18th century, the 13 British colonies along the Atlantic coast were thriving, yet distinct from their mother country. The colonists considered themselves loyal British subjects, proud of their heritage and the protection of the empire. However, they had also developed a unique character, tougher, more independent, and accustomed to managing their own affairs across vast distances. This spirit of self-reliance would soon clash with imperial authority. After Britain's costly victory in the 7 Years' War known as the French and Indian War in America, the empire faced immense debt and looked to the colonies to help pay for it. A series of taxes followed. The Stamp Act of 1765, which taxed newspapers, legal documents, and even playing cards. The Townshend Act, which imposed duties on everyday goods like glass paper and tea. And finally the Tea Act, which granted a British company a monopoly on tea sales. For the colonists, it wasn't just the financial burden that stuck, it was the principle. They had no elected representatives in the distant British Parliament, and thus, they argued, no taxation without representation. This slogan became a declaration of their fundamental dignity and rights as Englishmen. Resistance quickly took form. In 1773, in one of the most iconic acts of defiance, colonists in Boston, disguised as Mohawk warriors, boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor, the event known as the Boston Tea Party. The British response was swift and severe. Parliament passed the coercive acts dubbed the Intolerable Acts by the colonists, which closed the port of Boston, suspended the colony's self-government, and placed it under direct military rule. Suddenly, the conflict was no longer about taxes alone. It was about control and the very right to govern themselves. Across the colonies, town meetings transformed into resistance councils. Merchants organized boycotts of British goods. Farmers joined local militias known as Minutemen, and ordinary men and women began to question whether they needed a king at all. The colonies were awakening to a shared identity, no longer just scattered provinces, but a people with a common cause. Before a single shot was fired, the American Revolution was won in the minds of its people through the power of ideas. Writers and thinkers gave voice to this rising spirit of independence. Samuel Adams used fiery newspaper articles to rally Bostonians, while John Dickinson articulated colonial rights with measured arguments in his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. But the most explosive voice came from Thomas Paine, an Englishman who arrived in America just as tensions peaked. In January 1776, he published a 47-page pamphlet, titled Common Sense, written in plain, direct language accessible to shopkeepers, sailors, and farmers. Paine tore apart the concept of monarchy, calling King George III a tyrant, and boldly urging the colonies to declare independence immediately. His message was simple: it is time to part. Common Sense sold over 100,000 copies in mere months, a staggering number for the era, and fundamentally shifted public opinion. Ideas once whispered in taverns and coffee houses now rang out in homes and streets, uniting the colonies around a radical vision that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The transition from protest to war began under cover of darkness on April 18, 1775. British troops marched from Boston with orders to arrest revolutionary leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock in Lexington and seize weapons stockpiled in Concord. But the countryside was alert. A network of spies spread the word, and riders galloped through the night to sound the alarm. Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott raced on horseback, pounding on doors and shouting, "The regulars are coming out." Lanterns were hung in the steeple of Boston's Old North Church, one if by land, two if by sea, signaling the British route. By dawn, colonial Minutemen, mostly farmers and tradesmen armed with hunting rifles, had gathered on the village green in Lexington. As British soldiers approached, no one knows who fired the first shot, but the shot heard round the world echoed across history, marking the start of open rebellion. The British pushed on to Concord, where they found most weapons moved, and were harassed by militia firing from behind trees and stone walls all the way back to Boston. What began as a raid ended as a war. With the conflict ignited, the colonies needed leadership. At the Second Continental Congress, the natural choice to command the fledgling Continental Army was George Washington. Tall, reserved, and possessing a quiet dignity, Washington had earned respect as a Virginia planter and veteran of earlier conflicts. He accepted the role not with grand promises, but with a sense of duty, understanding the enormity of the task ahead. His army was untrained, poorly supplied, and often outnumbered. Yet, Washington's strategy was one of resilience and persistence. Instead of seeking decisive battles, he focused on survival, knowing that time and endurance could weigh down the British. His calm presence on the battlefield and his willingness to share his soldiers' hardships inspired fierce loyalty. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge became a crucible that tested the very soul of the Revolution. Washington's army endured biting cold, starvation, and disease in makeshift huts. Morale plummeted as lives were lost not to enemy fire, but to the elements. Yet, in this crucible of suffering, a remarkable transformation occurred. The arrival of Baron von Steuben, a disciplined Prussian officer, brought rigorous training and instilled much-needed order. Through relentless drills, he turned the ragged militia into a force capable of standing against British regulars. The bonds forged in shared hardship created an unbreakable resolve, and the army emerged from Valley Forge reborn, stronger and more united than ever. While the war raged on American soil, the revolutionaries knew they could not win alone. They needed international support. Enter Benjamin Franklin, the master diplomat. Sent to France, Franklin captivated the Parisian court with his wit, wisdom, and simple frontier charm. He painted the American struggle as a fight for liberty against tyranny, appealing to both Enlightenment ideals and France's desire to weaken its old rival Britain. In 1778, France formally allied with the American cause, providing crucial financial aid, supplies, and, most importantly, naval power. French warships patrolled the Atlantic, disrupting British supply lines. Spain and the Dutch Republic also offered covert support, turning a colonial rebellion into a global conflict that stretched Britain's resources thin. The tide turned decisively in 1781 at Yorktown, Virginia. In a bold and meticulously planned maneuver, General Washington, alongside French forces on land and a powerful French fleet at sea, trapped the British army under General Charles Cornwallis. Surrounded and cut off from reinforcements, Cornwallis endured weeks of relentless bombardment. On October 19, 1781, he surrendered. The victory at Yorktown was the symbolic end of British rule in America. It forced the British government to negotiate, leading to the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which officially recognized the independence of the United States. The American Revolution achieved more than military victory. It sparked a profound transformation in the concept of government. The Declaration of Independence, penned by Thomas Jefferson, declared that all men are endowed with unalienable rights and that governments exist by the consent of the governed. This radical idea that a nation could be founded on principles of liberty and equality resonated far beyond American shores, inspiring future generations and nations to challenge oppression. The revolution proved that ideas, once unleashed, could ignite a fire that no army could extinguish, creating a new nation built on the enduring belief that a more perfect union was not just possible, but worth fighting for. High in the Peruvian Andes, where the peaks pierce the clouds and the air is thin with altitude, lies Machu Picchu, a city of stone that seems to float between earth and sky. Often called the Lost City, it stands as a breathtaking testament to the ingenuity and spiritual depth of the Inca civilization, a marvel of engineering perfectly harmonized with the dramatic landscape. The story of Machu Picchu begins not with conquest or war, but with vision. Constructed in the 15th century under the reign of the Inca Emperor Pachacuti, Machu Picchu was likely built as a royal estate and sacred retreat for the elite. Its location, perched on a narrow ridge more than 7,000 feet above sea level, was chosen with deliberate care. Surrounded by large green mountains and embraced by swirling mists, the site offered both natural beauty and strategic isolation. It was not merely hidden, it was elevated both physically and spiritually above the ordinary world. The construction of Machu Picchu reveals a mastery of architecture and astronomy that defies its time. The Inca were masters of ashlar masonry, a technique in which stones are cut so precisely that they fit together seamlessly without mortar. Walls built using this method have withstood centuries of earthquakes, their interlocking blocks shifting slightly during tremors and then settling back into place. The city's layout is a symphony of form and function. Terraces carved into steep slopes prevented erosion and provided fertile ground for agriculture, while an intricate network of canals and fountains ensured a steady flow of fresh water from nearby springs. This sophisticated system sustained life in a challenging environment, transforming rugged terrain into a thriving community. Beyond practicality, every element of Machu Picchu reflects a deep reverence for the cosmos. The Inca believed that the sun, Inti, was the source of all life, and their architecture mirrored this belief. Temples and plazas align with celestial events such as solstices and equinoxes, turning the city itself into a giant observatory. The most famous of these structures is the Intihuatana stone, often called the hitching post of the sun during the winter solstice. The sun casts a unique shadow on this carved rock, suggesting it was used in rituals to mark the passage of time and honor the divine order of the universe. Sacred geometry guided the entire design. The angles, pathways, and alignments all speak of a culture that saw harmony between humanity, nature, and the heavens. Despite its grandeur, Machu Picchu was mysteriously abandoned less than a century after its construction. No one knows for certain why the Inca left this magnificent city, but several compelling theories exist. One suggests that as the Spanish conquistadors swept through South America, destroying Inca temples and seizing power, the people of Machu Picchu evacuated to protect their sacred knowledge and treasures. The city's remote location made it an ideal sanctuary, far from the reach of invaders. Another theory points to environmental factors. Earthquakes, landslides, or prolonged drought may have made life unsustainable at such a high altitude. A third possibility is political. As the center of Inca power shifted elsewhere, Machu Picchu may have simply lost its importance and been quietly relinquished. Whatever the reason, the departure appears to have been deliberate and orderly. There is no evidence of violence or destruction. Instead, the city was left intact, slowly reclaimed by the jungle. Vines crept over walls, moss softened stone steps, and the memory of its inhabitants faded into legend. For centuries, Machu Picchu existed only in whispers. Local Quechua people knew of its presence, passing down stories of a sacred place hidden among the clouds, but to the outside world, it was lost. That changed in 1911, when American explorer Hiram Bingham, guided by indigenous farmers, stumbled upon the ruins. His expedition, initially searching for the last capital of the Inca, instead uncovered a masterpiece of ancient engineering. Photographs of the site of crumbling temples rising above misty peaks and terraces clinging to sheer cliffs captured the global imagination. Machu Picchu was no longer a myth. It was a revelation. Bingham's rediscovery sparked decades of archaeological study. Scholars pored over the stonework, studied the water channels, and pieced together the lives of those who once walked its paths. They found remnants of workshops, homes, ceremonial platforms, and storage areas, evidence of a vibrant, self-sustaining community. Modern technology like drones and 3D mapping has since revealed even more secrets, uncovering hidden structures and offering new insights into how the Inca lived in balance with their environment. Today, Machu Picchu is far more than an archaeological wonder. It is a living legacy, a symbol of cultural pride for Peru, and a beacon of human achievement. It draws visitors from around the world who come not just to see its beauty, but to feel its silence, to walk where ancient rituals were performed, and to stand in awe of what was accomplished so long ago. The city endures as a bridge between past and present, reminding us that, even in abandonment, greatness leaves an echo. In the quiet stones and winding staircases of Machu Picchu, the spirit of the Inca lives on, an eternal conversation between earth, sky, and the enduring power of human aspiration. Ludwig van Beethoven's life is a profound testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit, a story where personal tragedy was transformed into transcendent art. Born in 1770 in Bonn, Germany, he entered a world pulsing with music. His father, Johann, a court musician, recognized his son's prodigious talent early and pushed him relentlessly to master the piano and violin. Young Ludwig displayed an uncanny ability to memorize and reproduce complex musical phrases, quickly setting himself apart in the city's vibrant musical scene. By his teens, he was already a skilled performer and composer, and his future seemed destined for greatness within the classical traditions of Mozart and Haydn. Yet, even as his star began to rise, a devastating shadow fell across his life. In his late 20s, Beethoven began to notice a terrifying change. The world of sound around him was beginning to blur and fade. At first, it was a slight buzzing or ringing in his ears, tinnitus, and moments of muffled hearing during rehearsals. As the years passed, these disturbances grew more pronounced and constant. By 1802, at just 31 years old, the reality was undeniable. He was going deaf. This diagnosis was not just a physical ailment. It was a catastrophic blow to a man whose entire identity was built upon sound. The very instrument through which he expressed his soul was being taken from him. His despair found voice in the Heiligenster Testament, a heart-wrenching letter to his brothers that he never sent. In it, he confessed his isolation, his fear of ridicule, and his contemplation of suicide. "I would have ended my life, it was only my art that held me back," he wrote. This moment of utter darkness became a crucible. Instead of surrendering, Beethoven made a defiant vow. He would not let silence defeat him. He resolved to seize fate by the throat and continue to compose. The process of composing without hearing required a radical transformation of his creative method. Beethoven turned inward, relying on three extraordinary faculties: memory, vibration, and imagination. He could hear the music in his mind with astonishing clarity, drawing upon the vast reservoir of sounds he had absorbed throughout his life. Every note he had ever played, every symphony he had ever heard, became a precious resource stored in his internal archive. He composed not with his ears, but with his intellect and soul, meticulously crafting each phrase on paper in a deeply meditative process. To connect with the physical reality of sound, he developed a unique way of feeling music. He would press his hand against the piano, placing his fingers directly on the wood of the soundboard to feel the vibrations travel through his body. He discovered that by doing so, he could sense the pulse, intensity, and pitch of the notes. Some accounts suggest he used a wooden rod, placing one end between his teeth and the other against the piano, allowing the vibrations to travel through his jawbone, a crude but effective form of bone conduction. These tactile sensations became his new language of music, a way to translate the silent architecture of his mind into something tangible. This period of profound isolation and adaptation gave birth to some of the most revolutionary works in Western music. Freed from the constraints of conventional auditory expectations, Beethoven's creativity soared. His compositions from this time are marked by unprecedented emotional depth, structural innovation, and dramatic power. The Eroica Symphony shattered the scale and scope of the symphonic form. The Moonlight Sonata explored new realms of mood and expression, and his later works of final piano sonatas and string quartets are journeys into the very essence of human emotion, filled with dissonance, struggle, and ultimately transcendent peace. His Ninth Symphony, completed in 1824 when he was almost completely deaf, stands as the ultimate triumph of his spirit. Its final movement, the Ode to Joy, is a universal anthem of brotherhood and hope. On the night of its premiere, Beethoven stood on stage conducting, unaware of the music, until the performance ended. When he finally turned to face the audience, he saw not their thunderous applause, but their tears and waving handkerchiefs. The conductor had to turn him around to show him the standing ovation he could not hear. Beethoven's journey into silence was not merely a personal battle. It was a redefinition of what music could be. He proved that music is not solely an auditory experience, but a profound interplay of memory, emotion, and physical sensation. His legacy endures not just in the notes on the page, but in the eternal echo of a soul that refused to be silenced. He taught the world that true genius can flourish in the deepest quiet, and that from the depths of adversity, the most powerful art can emerge. Long after his death, his music continues to resonate, a timeless testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the everlasting song that lives within us all.